Welcome back to another episode of the Migration Waterfowl podcast. I appreciate you all coming back and joining me today. I've got a special guest, Dr. Mike Brasher from Ducks Unlimited. How's it going today, Mike?
It's great, Brian. It's good to be with you.
Yeah, I appreciate you making time. Been following along with Duck DNA program, and I had some listeners reach out and ask me some questions, and I thought, well, might as well get the experts on here to explain it a little better than I can.
Sure. Happy to do so. We've been talking about it a lot. We had a meeting today, and it's consumed a fair bit of our time here lately. We're underway. So happy to answer any questions that you might have.
That's great. Can you share a bit about your background and how you became a waterfowl scientist?
For sure. I grew up in Mississippi, a very rural part of the state, and like most people in that situation, I spent a lot of time outside, hunting, fishing, trapping, riding four-wheelers, swimming in the river, just doing everything, setting trot lines, you name it, I did it. And along with my dad and my brother, and so that really set me on the path, and I chose to pursue a career in wildlife. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to specialize in, but I got to university and met some important people, and they took me under their proverbial wing. They were waterfowl researchers and whether it be a grad student or my advisor, and got into the community and met a lot of people and went to the right places, and did summer jobs in California, the Mississippi Delta, North Dakota, Canada, getting as much exposure as possible. And that led me to my master's degree studying mallard ducks up in the prairies at Mississippi State. I did my schooling at Mississippi State, but then went to the prairies of Canada for my summer field seasons. And then that led me to Ohio State for another waterfowl wetland-related research project. And was fortunate to then apply for and get a job with Ducks Unlimited back in 2005. So this is just a couple of weeks ago, maybe it was last week, I celebrated I surpassed my 20-year anniversary with DU. I worked on the Gulf Coast in Lafayette, Louisiana for 13 years, sort of a science and conservation planning type of position, and then moved here to national headquarters in 2019, I guess it was. And, I work with a variety of our staff, science staff across the country and into Canada and Mexico. Also work with university partners, researchers, graduate students to identify the important research questions that are still bugging us, things we still don't have answers to, and we help develop some of those research projects and help fundraise for some of the projects. And then once all that work is done and the data are collected and analyzed and reports written, then I, along with others, work to sort of modify some of our conservation actions or validate what it is that we're doing for the benefits that it provides to ducks and duck hunters and others that care about those places and things. And I get to think about ducks and duck habitat every day, and I get to talk about it a fair bit with a lot of different audiences. I don't do as much science anymore. I'm not out there collecting the data, but I'm supporting the people that do. And I help translate some of that information into conservation, and then also things like this, sort of talking about what's going on. So it's a pretty cool job, pretty cool day-to-day activities. It doesn't really feel like a job, and I'm happy about that.
Yeah, that's great. Anytime you can show up for work every day and it doesn't feel like too much work, it's a good thing.
Yeah, it's not without stress, of course. It's not without being busy, but you know that it's the type of work that gets you excited, and you enjoy the people that you work with, and come to the office every day and work with, and that makes a big difference. So, yeah,
Absolutely.
and we're fortunate. Of course, Ducks Unlimited does not exist without our partners. I think that's the other special thing. We're not driven by profit. if you want to measure profit for us, it's probably an incremental ducks gained or incremental habitat conserved and protected. And it's not the dollar. It's not the profit driven motive. And so we don't exist. My position doesn't exist without our volunteers, without our members, without all the people that care about the resource and that give of their time and their money and other resources to make this organization what it is, and give me the opportunity uh, to give back in my own way through the work that I'm able to do. So it's pretty cool in that regard, and I don't ever want to take that for granted. My dad, I have something on the wall here, some achievement awards or service awards that were given to my dad whenever he was a Ducks Unlimited area chairman, chapter chair, and so I grew up in Ducks Unlimited, going to the banquets, and so it's it's pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Ducks Unlimited is very important to us here at Migration Waterfowl. Most of my listeners, it's very important to them. So I appreciate you going into that because, there's always a few people out there listening that may not know too much about it. And it's great to educate them a little bit about Ducks Unlimited.
Yeah, yeah, always happy to do that.
So, what does a typical day look like for you in your current role?
Oh, well, it's a lot of time behind the computer. Um, I just typed in three little letters there. I had right before I came in here, I'd gone down to one of my our intern, our assistant's office. We have three conservation science assistants that I work with every day, and I'd stepped in there, and she was on the phone, and so she was just messaging me, like asking if I needed something. I'm like, well, yeah, but it's okay. We can deal with it tomorrow. So a lot of time in the office, a lot of time behind a computer, a lot of time talking with other people. Rarely do I get my hands on the animals anymore, except when I'm hunting, and that's pretty. That's a nice thing. So yeah, it's a lot of time in front of the computer, sharing the things that I've been fortunate enough to learn, and the relationships, connecting people. Uh, I've been in this field, in this profession for effectively 25 years, if you count, and maybe a little bit longer if you count my the time in graduate school. So I'm able to connect people. And a lot of people, this is the way it is with everyone. You're able to connect people that need to be connected because they have a shared interest in something. You're like, yep, I know who's working on that. Let me make that introduction. Um, and so there's a lot of that. There's also a lot of phone calls, a lot of video calls, a lot of meetings, helping to coordinate a lot of the activities that are going on or contributing to various activities, whether they be conservation and science related or increasingly some internal work here in the organization, ensuring that our messaging is consistent with the science and our understanding of conservation needs. Um, we had a call earlier today with a professor at University of Texas El Paso, Dr. Phil Ovretsky, coordinating some of what we are launching this year with Duck DNA, updating him on the status of applications, and um, updating him on other things. We're going to try to schedule a trip out to UTEP to visit with him and his staff. We've been doing this for 2.5 years now, and we've yet to go out and visit with him. We've spent many hours on Zoom meetings and team meetings, and so eh, there's a lot of that. But then occasionally we do get to travel to a scientific conference, which is where we were a couple of weeks ago. I get to travel occasionally to visit with volunteers at various events and talk about some of our work, and then occasionally we get to go um, and participate in either conservation efforts or some in the field research efforts. And um, so it's a mixed bag, but most of the time is spent in the office, just staying super busy on a whole
Yeah,
host of things. But that's kind of me, and other folks are a little bit different in what they do.
sure.
But yeah.
So you've been at it a long time. I'm sure there's been a lot of highlights and a lot of satisfaction. Is there any moments that stick out? You have a couple of favorite highlights from your career?
I would probably say where we are right now with this duck DNA project, it's not the most consequential scientific question of the day. I'll be the first to admit that. But what we've been able to do in connecting with the hunters and engaging them in this science and the energy that we've built behind this was just like a concept, almost like a gimmicky concept, like, 23andMe or whatever for ducks. We knew there was some science here. We knew there was some potential here. But to see the response from the waterfowl hunting community, to have brought in 3 conservation science assistants that are sort of 12-month term positions that are helping out with this, really the lead, the lead on this project, seeing what they've been able to accomplish, seeing them develop in the early stages of their professional career, contributing to something that has captivated a good section of the waterfowl hunting community. I mean, that's a pretty cool thing. And I would probably say right about now, given all that is happening around that project, it's certainly a highlight, because you feel that you've built something that resonates with a lot of different people that care about something that you have a shared interest in. And, it's like, what more could you ask for, but to have that kind of reception to something that that you, along with others, helped develop. And and also, I think the other reason is that it is so different. It is so unique and sort of
Sure.
innovative. And we didn't know how it was going to develop, and we still don't know what it's going to turn into or how long it's going to go. But like right now, it's a pretty cool place to be time wise. And I know that's the thing that's occupying a lot of my time right now, but I really would have to say, because of all those reasons, and especially because of the role that our assistants are playing in it, and seeing the beginning of their career, that's something special. And to know that this project has helped them in that regard, that's really why this is different.
Right. Yeah. Can you explain what the DNA program is and why it was developed?
I can. So this began because of some work that, to be honest, this began because of some work that I was doing as one of our podcast hosts. That's one of the other things that I kind of got roped into when I first came here back in 2019 was right place at the right time, or right place at the wrong time, however you want to look at that. And we were starting a podcast. DU was starting a podcast, and they wanted me to come on and be a periodic guest. And then one thing led to another. And then before you know it, I'm one of the co-hosts. And so
Mhm.
we were looking for topics to cover. And Dr. Phil Ovretsky had just published some research on game farm mallards, and this discovery of these mystery genes in amongst some of the genetic work that he was doing and sampling mallards and black ducks across North America. And so we wanted to talk to Phil. We had him on several episodes, and we began to develop a bit of a friendship and some shared ideas. And we said, what if we were able to develop a platform or a way to involve waterfowl hunters in collecting some of these genetic samples to help answer some of the questions that Phil and other researchers have about genetics in waterfowl populations? And we can kind of talk about the specific questions, but that's sort of a side thing. It was
Mhm.
the questions, there's a whole host of questions. And the idea was, what if we could get hunters who harvest millions of ducks annually to contribute tissue samples from those harvested ducks? We can provide guidance on what kind of ducks and where and when that we want them to sample. But what if we could do that? And that would be really cool, because the other thing that Phil was already doing is that people were reaching out to him just sort of organically. They'd shoot a hybrid, and they were learning about Phil and his ability to do the genetic analysis and identify the ancestry of the parent species of a given hybrid. People were already starting to reach out to him and ask him to do this analysis. And so that's when we got to talking on the podcast, and he's like, I know there's interest in doing that. And we were like, that's sort of the gee whiz aspect of this. There's some important science there, but there's some gee whiz elements to it as well. And we said, but what if we could collect and develop a much larger database of genetic samples from waterfowl, from ducks, and use that, make it publicly available to researchers to answer questions of a genetic origin within waterfowl? I said, "That would be really cool. Can we start to do that?" And yeah, admittedly, 23andMe or Ancestry. Well, not Ancestry, but 23andMe. Or I forget what the other one is, but was sort of the idea we had in our mind. You send out a kit, people collect some samples, send it back, you do the analysis, the data goes in a database. And the first thing that I did is I said, "Okay, Phil, send me some vials," because I'm a hunter. I knew in order for this to work, it had to be easy for the hunter to do in the field.
Sure.
And I said, "Phil, send me some vials. I'm going to take them out hunting with me this year. I'm going to sort of go through the motions and figure out what we can or can't do and how big of an inconvenience is it." So I don't know. He gave me 10 or 20 vials, and I filled those the first year. And conceptually, the things began to develop in my mind. And then we brought in that just happened to coincide with the timing when I was bringing in some interns, some 12-month conservation science assistants, and I put them to work helping design it. And so that's kind of how it came about. And what it is a platform wherein we engage waterfowl hunters in collecting tissue samples from harvested birds. You can go to duckdna.com to learn more about the project. The process that involves first interested hunters going to that website and clicking on one of the buttons that says apply today. That takes you to another site, which is a new part of the project this year. It takes you to a separate site where you register. This is all free, thanks to our generous donors. It still is no cost to hunters. So the first thing you have to do is you have to apply. We then periodically throughout the hunting season will draw random samples of hunters from the total number of applicants. We do stratify that sampling by state because we want to get a good representation all across the country. We specify that we want people to collect tissue samples from mallards, black ducks, mottled ducks, or Mexican ducks, or any other interesting looking bird, a hybrid or leucistic bird or whatever else. And then there's instructions on putting the tissue in a vial, and they store it in the freezer, and then they return it to the lab with pre-attached, prepaid postage, return postage. We wanted to take care of all of this. It gets mailed to their doorsteps after they're selected. Now, you don't get a kit just because you apply, because we have several thousand applicants right now, and we're
Sure.
probably only going to be able to enroll, if we're able to enroll 1,000 people this year, that's going to be we'll be very happy about that. That sort of depends on the amount of funding that we get. So that's, in a nutshell, that's what it is. You apply for a kit. If you're selected, you receive a kit. There's 3 vials in the kit. There are instructions on what to do. The piece of tissue that you collect is actually taken from the tongue of the duck. That way you don't have to get inside the bird. If you want to taxidermy the bird, you can still do that. You're just taking a little piece of the tongue. Return the samples. They get analyzed, and then you get a certificate. Oh, you have to enter a bit of additional information for each of the harvested birds: the date, location, species, sex, habitat that it was harvested in, and then Phil does the genetic analysis, and you get a certificate of pedigree, I think is what it's called, for each of those birds. And it will tell you if it's a pure wild mallard, pure wild black duck. It will tell you if it has game farm mallard ancestry in it. It will tell you if it's a hybrid, is it a mallard black duck hybrid? It'll tell you the percentage of mallard ancestry, the percentage of black duck ancestry, for example, in a mallard black duck hybrid. So if it's a first generation hybrid, second generation hybrid. So all sorts of cool stuff. We have a results page on the website where people can check it out. And so in a nutshell, that's what it is. And we can dig into other details however you want to.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, besides being really cool for the hunter to get a certificate and see exactly what that bird is, kind of walk us through what the research goals are, kind of, what your approach is from that angle.
Yeah, there's a couple of, like I said, a number of questions that can be addressed through the data that we're collecting. One of the more notable research questions that people are going to be familiar with and will likely have heard about is this issue of game farm mallards in amongst our and breeding with our wild mallard population. Game farm mallards originate from European sort of domestic stock, if you will. They're the wild mallard population in Western Europe is essentially no more. Most of the mallards that they have there are released birds, released annually. Some countries release several million, farm raised mallards every year to supplement or really to create their hunting opportunities, their mallard shooting opportunities. So that had been going on for quite some time, maybe the 1800s or even 1700s when that first started.
Hmm.
In the early 1900s, hunters and clubs and states on the East Coast here in the Atlantic Flyway of the U.S., folks came up with the idea of stocking programs to try to help recover duck populations from the depressed levels following the Dust Bowl, also following that period of market hunting. And they tried raising and releasing wild strain birds and eggs that were caught from the wild, and that just didn't work. So then they had the idea of using game farm raised birds, which they're semi-domestic. They originated from wild mallards, but they've been bred and crossbred and sort of selectively bred to favor the traits that work well in captivity. And so those birds there was sort of a movement to start raising and releasing game farm mallards in the Atlantic Flyway to augment local shooting opportunities. The belief was that those birds would mostly be shot, or they would otherwise remain somewhat local, or they would not reproduce. There was no belief that they would be reproductively viable at a major scale. And so for the longest time, that went on for decades. And for the longest time, nobody had any indication that those game farm birds were actually breeding with wild mallards. And it wasn't until Dr. Lavretsky in the mid 20-teens was doing some of the additional research and thanks to additional genetic analyses and genetic techniques, they were able to get finer and finer genetic signatures between mallards, black ducks, hybrids, mottled ducks, etc.
Hmm.
And in Phil's analysis, he was trying to identify mallards, black ducks, and their hybrids. And in looking at his sample of mallards that they had harvested, there began to emerge this sort of set of mystery genes that they couldn't associate with wild mallards that they had sampled from, let's say, the Prairie Pothole region or California, nor were they assigned to black ducks. And so it was this other genetic signature. And Phil got to looking around and thinking, and he compared it to some game farm mallard genes, and voila, there was a match. So he's like, okay, game farm mallards are hybridizing with wild mallards and producing viable offspring in the wild. So then that begged several questions. One, how prevalent is it? How widespread is this issue? But then the other is like, okay, well, so what? It looks like it's got a green head. It's got a yellow bill. It's got orange feet, at least if we're talking about the drake. It's still a mallard, right? Well, it turns out that subsequent research comparing sort of reproductive rates, comparing survival rates, comparing foraging efficiency, comparing the morphological traits, as we call it, the size of the bill, the length of the bill, the width of the bill, the length of the wings, all these different measurements, length of the legs, proved that there are differences. Game farm mallards themselves are vastly different from wild mallards, structurally, behaviorally. And then even when you look at the hybrids, if you have a game farm mallard that breeds with a wild mallard, that the offspring of that mating is different behaviorally, morphologically, etc., from a wild mallard. It's sort of intermediate. It has lower productivity. It moves less. It migrates shorter distances. The timing of its migration is different from wild mallards. It is less likely to incubate the eggs that it lays. It is more likely to use urban habitats, like multiple things that you can look to and that we can measure, and that Ducks Unlimited and other entities have supported some research that are looking at these things, because when you capture a bird, you can draw the blood, you can get the genetics from that, and then if you've got these backpack GPS tracking devices on it, you can measure all that stuff. So you've got the genetics that you're then tying to movements, migration, timing, productivity, etc., and you can say, are they in fact different? And the answer is yes. The greater and the interesting thing is that the greater the amount of game farm ancestry that these birds have, the more different they are, which is kind of what you would expect. So some of those behaviors, some of those appearance features are genetically linked, and so that's the one question in a long-winded way that we're trying to answer is like, what's the prevalence and how widespread are those game farm genes in amongst our wild mallard, black duck, mottled duck, and Mexican duck populations? So that's why we're focusing on that group of species, because a lot of people, when they don't realize if they've harvested, they'll harvest a mallard and it looks normal. They'll send it in for analysis and it'll come back, 75% wild mallard, 25% game farm mallard, or something like that. And we've found game farm genes in 45 of 48 states from which we've had samples submitted the first 2 years. I guarantee you, with enough time, we'll find game farm ancestry in mallards from those other 3 states.
Wow.
And it's more prevalent in some states and in some locations than others, and that's one of the things that we're wanting to kind of figure out. We know to some extent what that distribution looks like. It's more abundant, more prevalent in the Atlantic Flyway and in the Great Lakes. But there's a number of other questions at finer scales that we could answer. So that's one. The other sort of longer term genetic questions could relate to sort of trying to understand the differences. What causes those differences in those different behaviors. Phil and others are looking at things as specific as the structure of the mitochondria and how the powerhouse of the cells. What enables birds or animals to convert stored sugars and carbohydrates into energy. And there's some indication that certain mitochondria or shapes and features of mitochondria are less efficient at converting those foods and fats into energy. And so that might be the mechanism that would explain some of those observed differences. I think there's also an opportunity going forward to link genetics with the locations of some of these birds. We've not really imagined all of the research hypotheses, but genetics, and some of this may come from independent studies. Let's just say, for example, if you're able to link disease susceptibility to genetics, then we could look at this larger database and say, well, what's the distribution of that genetic trait across North America? The same thing with regard to migration tendencies. If you can identify sort of genetic traits or signatures that may code for certain types of behaviors, we'd be able to talk about the frequency of that across different parts of the country. And then also just the hybrid situation, understanding more about different types of hybrids that are occurring. Are they more likely to occur in some parts of the landscape than others? And then a whole host of other questions that I'm sure we haven't even imagined yet. So we're building a very large genetic database that's going to be available to answer a lot of questions. And that's just for a small subset of species right now. Will we ever get to a point where we're requesting samples from green wings, blue wings, widgeon? I don't know. We're just still pretty early.
Okay. Yeah, that's super interesting. Do you have a ballpark percentage of what our wild mallard population looks like with how much game farm are in there?
That's going to vary by flyway, I can tell you the results that I would call these preliminary results, because there's probably going to be a slight upward bias to some of these numbers because people and we're trying to figure out how to address this. People are probably more likely to submit interesting looking birds. This isn't
Sure.
a totally, truly random sample, and we understand that. We think with a large enough sample, some of that bias becomes smaller. We're also imagining some questions that we could ask this year to help us understand the magnitude of that potential bias. But anyway, that's sort of a side story. Um, so in the Atlantic flyway, I think over the first 2 years, if you look at the mallards that have been submitted, about 70 to 73%, 75% of those included game farm ancestry. If you look in the Mississippi and Pacific flyway, I think that percentage is somewhere around 20 or 25% of the birds of the mallards
Hmm.
submitted have game farm ancestry. The percentage in the Pacific flyway was higher than what we anticipated. The Central flyway, it's about 15%. And so I think if you look across all of that, but again, it's not a you'd have to make sure that you do an appropriate weighting for sample sizes and population sizes and so forth. You're probably in the 20 to 30% range. Probably around 30% that would have, maybe 20 to 30%, let me just say, might have some game farm ancestry in them based on the initial data that we've collected. But we're not ready to take that to publication
Sure.
by any
Sure.
stretch. We're still actively learning.
So, what is the scientific community's outlook on game farm mallards mixing with wild? Is it a concern? Is it a threat? What level are you at this point?
It's definitely a concern. I think most scientists, if not all scientists, would agree that from a North American waterfowl conservation perspective, our success should be measured relative to our ability to conserve populations, maintain abundant populations of wild waterfowl. I think if we get to a point where we are achieving abundant populations of ducks through the release of farmed birds, for lack of a better description,
Mhm.
then we've not done our job in adequately conserving the habitats and providing the resources across all the landscapes that they need to maintain those historical distributions and abundances. And say historical abundances, it's like what's an appropriate abundance, but there's some thought that goes into all that. So it's definitely a concern. I don't think there's any member of the scientific community that sees game farm mallards as a solution to low duck numbers. Habitat conservation and other measures have to be at the forefront of our efforts to conserve duck populations. There is concern about some of these behavioral issues. So it's, if they did not interbreed with wild mallards, and if there were not differences genetically or behaviorally or physiologically even, then maybe it wouldn't be as big of an issue. But that's not what we're seeing. There are
Right.
differences.
Right.
Uh, how it's I don't think we're seeing a situation where those genes are being manifest and are being, or they're not taking over, because they're maladapted. But what has happened, the concern would be, do we start releasing so many of these birds that we begin to swamp the wild population of mallards, which is actually what has happened in the Atlantic flyway through the
Sure.
years. The quantity of released birds overwhelms the wild mallards. And so eventually that is the genetic signature that begins to dominate. It's just simple math. If you are releasing 2 or 3 times the number of through time, the number of mallards, that wild mallards that are occupying some of that landscape, then uh, you are going to shift the genetics of that and any of the behavioral things that come along with it of those sort of local or regional populations. The mallard population in the central Mississippi flyway is so large, continues to be so large. You're looking at 5-6 million in the breeding population
Uh-huh.
just in recent years, and you go back 7 or so years, you're up closer to 9 or 10 million just in the breeding population. Then you look at the fall population, and you're closer to 10, 12, 15. Uh, we have not seen a number of game farm mallards. The number of game farm mallards released overall in the Mississippi and Central Flyway has not been nearly at a level that would threaten the genetic integrity of that larger population. Now, in the Great Lakes region, where mallard populations are a little bit lower, and maybe they don't get as many migrants that come out of the prairies into that area. I mean, they still get a lot, but I think you've got. I don't know if there's a lot of game farm releases, or if it's just you've got so many urban centers that provides a haven and ideal habitat for those domestic mallards
Right.
that are released and kind of take hold there, that they then begin to hybridize, to interbreed with the wild mallards, and so we begin to see some elevated game farm ancestry levels in that region. So um, it's definitely concerning, but like I said, it's not the most pressing issue facing waterfowl conservation. That continues to be the loss of prairie wetlands and grasslands that drives those continental duck populations, and the loss and conversion and degradation of all other habitats across North America. So um, the other thing here I would say is that state and federal agencies have an important role to play here when it comes to any sort of regulatory issue. People often ask, well, what are we going to do about this? I mean, that's a question for our state and federal partners and their constituents, quite honestly. What do our constituents think or say needs to be the situation here? States do have the authority to regulate and restrict these type of activities. The federal government has the ability to do that. There have been some efforts in the past to attempt to do that. Some of the flyway councils do have stated positions opposing the release of game farm mallards. There's a lot of political opposition to this.
Sure.
Florida is one state that has dramatically restricted the releases, the situations under which people can possess and release domestic mallards because of the threat that they are posing to their resident Florida mottled ducks. That's a very real issue. The
Hmm.
genetics show that. And so they took measures a few years ago to limit what people could or could not do with domestic mallards. So it's
That
possible, but that's it. This is part of the scientific process. You collect the data, you understand the implications of whatever you may be trying to measure, and then if it rises to a level of concern for biological, ecological, or social reasons, then if there are regulatory mechanisms to be put in place, then presumably it gets to that point, and those actions are taken.
yeah. Yeah, it's good to know that Florida's kind of keeping an eye on that and taking some action. And yeah, like you said, we got to get our own house in order with the habitat loss and get that straightened out, I guess, before we start worrying about the fringe things.
Yeah, for sure. Um,
So, what have been some of the most surprising discoveries from the duck DNA program so far?
I would say some of the most surprising things have come out of well, for me personally, a couple years ago, I shot a bird that I could have sworn was going to be 100% wild mallard. It turns out that it is a second generation mallard black duck hybrid, which means the bird that I shot had parents, one of its parents was a first generation hybrid. It was a mallard black duck hybrid. And then that bird bred with a mallard. And then its offspring, which is the bird that I shot, that second generation bird, it was 75% mallard, 25% black duck, give or take, looked just like a mallard. It just, that's sort of a
Wow.
reflection of how those ancestral mallard genes really, really take over. Had
Sure.
several other scientific colleagues and partners that did the same thing. They shot a bird they thought was going to be a pure wild mallard. It was a second generation mallard black duck hybrid. The mallard black duck hybrids, second generation, are more widespread than you would think. We've got a lot of those second generation hybrids showing up in the Central Flyway and Pacific Flyway, and it's pretty neat to see that. You can plot the location, harvest location of these birds based on that, the generational history. And sure enough, most of those F1 hybrids, black duck mallards, are in the Atlantic Flyway or Mississippi Flyway, and then most of those that show up in the Central or Pacific Flyway are your second generation, representing those movements back across flyways. And as an additional year has gone on, some of the other things that have been interesting are some of the 3 species hybrids that we've picked up: blue-winged teal, cinnamon teal, shoveler hybrid. We've had several like F2, second or third generation blue-winged teal, shoveler hybrids, which means there was a blue-winged teal hybridized with a shoveler, and then that offspring hybridized or back crossed with a blue-winged teal, and then that offspring back crossed with another blue-winged teal.
Oh, wow.
And yet you can still see some of those hybrid traits, which is different from the mallard, and just kind of shows, I think, how much more closely related the black duck and the mallard are to one another. But we're starting to also get some hybrid submissions from hybrid geese. People need to be on the lookout for that. You should follow our social media account. I think on Instagram, it's at the Duck DNA. And then on Facebook, we're at Duck DNA. Every week we post an interesting hybrid or other interesting bird, and we tell the history of it, and we provide the genetics. And for October, what we're planning to do is release the results from some of our hybrid geese to sort of play into a spooky Halloween theme, around the month of October. So we're going to have fun with that, make it entertaining, yet also make it educational. And we're engaging hunters in this, and they love it. The feedback and engagement we get is so rewarding, so refreshing, and people are so appreciative of the opportunity. They're so appreciative of the work we're putting into trying to answer some of these questions. I'm trying to think of some of the more other interesting things. Those would probably be the highlight. I mean, other than us having detected game farm genes in 45 of the 48 states from which we've received samples in just 2 years. I mean, that's pretty notable.
Yeah, I wouldn't have expected that.
That's wild. I did not expect it to be as widespread. I didn't either. Certainly not in 2 years.
Sure. How do you see waterfowl conservation science evolving in the next 10 to 20 years?
I think the biggest thing is the adoption of new technologies. I hope it is the greater involvement of the hunting community, the habitat management community, to help us more efficiently collect some of the data. I would imagine a lot of your listeners heard about some of the funding constraints and worry about losses of funding for the bird banding lab and even the breeding population survey here recently. And, those type of budgetary constraints have been happening for a while. Federal government, federal agencies had not seen, at least the ones that you and I would care most about, had not seen budgetary increases in recent years, and things are getting more expensive with each passing year. And they were already facing some worry about their ability to continue to conduct surveys the way they had done historically. And they're already thinking about new technology. How can we use satellite imagery? How can we use unmanned aerial vehicles, drones? How can we use our mobile devices to collect data? We're out in the field. Hunters are out in the field more than scientists are. That's one of the interesting revelations, is that as scientists, we sometimes ask our colleagues within the scientific community to collect data whenever you go out hunting and so forth. And the response is usually not as energetic as you would think. Certainly not as energetic as a response as we got whenever we asked hunters to do it. And it dawned on me, it's like the reason for that is that this is what we do every day. We need a getaway from having to think about data. There are a lot of us, we always think about it, right? But we're human. We need the opportunity to get away. And when we hunt, we like to just be hunters. and we don't want to have to worry about
Sure.
collecting data. And, that's not to say that we don't, but it's we when we hunt, we get a lot of enjoyment out of that because we can go back to just being hunters, and that's something that we all have to have. Whereas hunters, non-scientists, folks that don't work in this field, or they may be scientists that work in a different field, they're out there and they're like, I want to do something different. I want to contribute. And so they are so energetic about wanting to fill that request. That's been a really cool revelation and understanding moment of understanding. Like if you want to get large quantities of data from the field, ask the hunters. Don't ask your scientists that do this every day.
Sure.
Ask your hunters. Find a way that it makes it easy for them to do that. And yet you can still get good quality data. And we've shown that we can do that. And so that's one of the other things that I hope we see more of. I hope we see more collaboration across organizations and agencies in that space. We're working right now with the Cornell Lab of Ornithology on a number of projects. They're not known for waterfowl or waterfowl hunting. They focus more on and have traditionally catered more towards bird watchers and folks that love looking at and working on the small passerines, the little songbirds, and so forth. But there's a lot of shared interest, and there's a lot of
Sure.
shared talent and a lot of complementary talent between our organizations. And I think and that's all organizations, not just Ducks Unlimited in Cornell. And so I think we're going to see more of that. So that's on the science side of things, and conservation. We're going to continue to use that science to inform what we do and where we do it. We're going to continue to broaden the partnerships. We're going to continue to advocate that conservation be bipartisan, apolitical. It's not Republican. It's not Democratic. It's
Amen.
for all of us, and we have to find ways to agree on that common interest. And so that means we're going to have to work with a lot of non-traditional partners, and that on the surface you might scratch your head and say, well, why is Ducks Unlimited partnering with that group? Well, it's because although their mission, if we're talking about some industry or something like that, may not be perfectly aligned with us, there is still part of their mission that does align with us. You don't have to
Right.
be perfectly 100% aligned to work together. Can't be the way we look at the world. We have to be able to find common ground with people who differ from us in societal views, in priorities, in backgrounds, and in primary mission statements. So that's what we're going to continue to do, and we've been successful at that in recent years, and I'm optimistic that we'll continue to do so. We have to do that because the threats facing waterfowl and their habitats have never been greater. There's a lot of stuff happening right now with renewable energy and solar farms and wind turbines here in the Mississippi Alluvial Valley that kind of wigging people out. And we're trying to study that, trying to figure out ways to study that and what its impact on waterfowl and waterfowl habitat might be. And so we have to all work together to figure those things out and try to find the best collaborative outcome across this shared landscape. And there's going to be some winners and there's going to be some losers, and some of us will win sometimes and some of us will win other times. And
Yeah.
that's the way it's going to be.
Absolutely. Are there any other projects that you're excited about outside of the duck DNA?
Well, the other one, I'll float this idea. It'll be interesting if you get any comments on this, if we get any feedback. The Duck DNA platform itself is we're particularly excited about because it gives us an opportunity to engage hunters in collecting data to answer a multitude of questions. Here recently, we partnered with a researcher at Penn State University to submit a proposal in which we would use the Duck DNA platform to enroll hunters in collecting samples from harvested ducks to test for avian flu.
Hmm.
I know there's a lot of people that are going to be a little uneasy about any kind of virus that we're testing for, but again, I've been I've been working on that issue with our partners for about the past 3 or 4 years and helping represent some of what we've tried to understand and what hunters need to know. And generally, the reception has been pretty good among hunters. They want to know. They want to know because they see birds dying from this. And in order to understand what's happening, why they're dying, why some species are more susceptible than others, you got to have data. And I'm optimistic, maybe this is one of my flaws, is being sort of eternally optimistic that there will be enough hunters that see value in that data that they would want to contribute, despite there being some conspiracy theories around any kind of virus that we're talking about. I think there's a lot of hunters. I'm optimistic there will be a lot of hunters that would want to participate in something like that. I think there would be some additional training required, instructions required to
Sure.
collect the samples that would be asking for. Um, but that's one that I'm hopeful it gets funded, and then we see what kind of reception involvement we get from the hunting community. Um, I don't know. We haven't received any word yet on whether that would be funded, but that's certainly exciting. There's a lot of work that's going on in the prairies to help us understand and quantify changes to that landscape. How rapidly are wetlands being lost? Where are they being lost? How rapid are grasslands being converted to agricultural uses? Is there any type of incentive that we can craft to discourage that conversion, to make it more profitable for the landowner, for the rancher, to keep that land in grass, to keep those wetlands on the landscape? Ducks Unlimited does not want to be a group that regulates our way to success. We want to work with landowners. We want to work with ranchers and farmers and everybody that we share this country with, so that they're able to have their standard of living, so that they're able to improve their livelihoods for themselves and their families and pass it on to future generations. But then that also delivers benefits to wildlife and wildlife habitats and clean water and flood risk reduction. We've seen tons of flood risk, elevated flood risk in recent years, and there's a role for wetland conservation to play in that. So no shortage of things to think about and get excited about. There's all those things are sort of rooted in challenges, but I, if you want to contribute to something bigger than yourself, try to leave the world a little bit better than what you found it, or what it would be in if you didn't contribute, then conservation is a great place to invest your time and whatever resources you have, and that could contribute directly to the conservation, to the on the ground, kind of move the dirt conservation, or it could be investments in the science that informs how and where and when we do that kind of conservation. So there's a lot to be excited about. There's a lot to be concerned about, but those things are going to be with us. And duck populations are down right now from sort of recent highs of 2015,
Right.
2016. We've got ongoing drought in the prairies. We know what's happening there. We're hopeful that those conditions, that rain will return to the prairies soon, and we'll get a bounce back in duck populations, because that helps everyone and gets us all in a better mood. And but yeah, we're still producing ducks. There's still going to be new ducks flying south this fall. Still going to be a lot of huntable ducks, and you'll have good days, you'll have bad days, and we're in a good place with duck populations in North America, and we'll continue fighting the good fight, and we'll welcome everybody to the table that wants to help out.
Yeah, that's great. We're super fortunate to have an organization like Ducks Unlimited and scientists like yourself that are not only willing but excited about making a difference. And yeah, sometimes we take it for granted, but I'm glad you touched on all that. Everybody can help out in their own little way, whether it's money or time, or every little bit helps for sure.
Yep. One of the easiest ways to get involved, which I'm sure many of your listeners are, and I hope all of them will if they haven't, is to attend a banquet. Attend a Ducks Unlimited event near you. You can go to ducks.org/events and find a banquet near you. The banquet season is ramping up. You can go there and have a great time with that kind of social gathering with like-minded people, fellow duck hunters. You can spend some money, you can drink a few beverages, you can get involved in the auctions. All of that contributes to what we do. And if if you've got some additional time on your hand, or you're just looking to make an additional contribution to something else, ask somebody at those banquets about how you can be how you can be a member of that chapter. It's a great way to meet people and contribute to conservation. And it doesn't matter if you don't have to be a major donor, you don't have to be the person that leads that chapter to make it happen. I can tell you from experience, it takes all sorts of people and time and resources to make it happen. Like when I volunteer on committees or help out at banquets, I mean, I'm not always the best at going out and finding additional auction items or selling tables, but I can go early and help set up for the banquet. I can stay late and help clean up. All of that stuff matters. All of that contributes. I mean, it may feel like you're just picking up trash or putting away tables or setting up tables or putting together some of the auction items, but all that it matters. I mean, it's that, and that is the astounding thing. If you were to add up, and I wish, and maybe they've done it, I don't know. If you were to add up all the hours that our volunteers contribute to this organization, setting up banquets, cleaning up banquets, searching for additional auction items, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's tens of millions of dollars that we don't count. That's
Yeah,
not revenue. That's not revenue in the door, but that is a real value, and that's what makes Ducks Unlimited special. And everybody can be part of that.
absolutely. Do you have a favorite duck species?
I've been asked that so many times that I've kind of came up with one, and it's the wood duck. It's a
Okay,
local breeder where I grew up. Always see them throughout the year. They've saved many a hunt for me. They are a fantastic eating bird. They are very consistent in their flavor. One of the best tasting ducks out there. And
oh
I
yeah,
think they taste great, and they're super consistent because
yeah,
of how consistent their diet is. I think that's what I like about them most, is the consistency. Um, and they're gorgeous,
it's a great
and they
point.
have long pair bonds, and they're local breeders to where I am, widely distributed. Second to the mallard, probably the most recognizable duck species out there.
Yeah, that's a great one for sure. What's one thing most hunters don't know about ducks that you wish they did?
Don't know about ducks that I wish they did. Huh. Never been asked that question. I would say, and this is sort of partly a product of what I studied in my master's degree. I would, and this is technical. This is kind of geeky. Um, I wish, I wish people had a greater appreciation for their mating systems and their courtships, um, how unique they are in the bird world in so many respects with regard to that mating system and reproductive ecology and reproductive those adaptations. Um, they they're seasonally monogamous. One male, like you think about turkeys, there you have one male that mates with multiple females. Grouse, same way. Um, so ducks and geese are different. They One male pairs with a female. You see variation in the length of those pair bonds across the different species of waterfowl. I know you asked me about ducks, but I'm going to expand this to waterfowl.
Sure.
Geese and swans mate for life. Ducks do not. There's some ducks that we think might repair. Um, Ducks and geese and swans are different, largely different among the bird world in that it's only female parental care. The male does not play a part in caring for the young. That's different. You think about songbirds, cardinals, robins, wrens, etc. Both both members engage in that in the care for the young. It's also a little bit different because you do have that pair bond. You think about, you can say the same thing about turkeys and other upland game birds, but ducks and geese are different because they have that pair bond. Turkeys don't. And
Hmm.
so in the turkeys, you've got the female only parental care, but it's but there's no pair bond. So that's kind of easy to explain. But ducks have that seasonal pair bond. Um, Yet it's still only female parental care, and that's just because the ducklings are precocial and they're able to feed and move around and on their own shortly after hatch. And the only thing the male does in that situation is draw more attention from predators and increase the risk of
Mm,
predation on those ducklings if that male stays around. Um, their reproductive anatomy, I'll avoid getting into some of the specifics, is also unique in the bird world. It's just they're fascinating. From their
for sure.
reproductive ecology is really cool. Again, I studied some of that for my master's, but I wish people had a deeper understanding and appreciation for that, just because it's some really cool. It's a really cool part of the adaptation of waterfowl.
No doubt. Well, Dr. Mike, I appreciate you making the time today. Great conversation. I want to give you an opportunity to let everybody know where they can find the Duck DNA program and how they can get involved.
Absolutely. You can go to duckdna.com, click on apply today. That's going to take you to another site. It's our application portal. You're going to have two options. You can apply for our standard kit, which is, if you're selected, you would receive 3 vials. Uh, and you can also apply for our hybrid kit, but you can only apply, we ask that you only apply for that one if you already have a hybrid or otherwise interesting looking bird in hand. Now, some people have asked and they said, I shot a hybrid last year and I still have it in the freezer. Can I request a hybrid kit? The answer is yes. That tissue sample should still be good. You just take the tissue a 1/4 inch of the tip of the tongue. So yes, but if you can apply for a standard kit or a hybrid kit, but we ask that you only apply for the hybrid kit if you already have that hybrid or interesting looking bird in your hand. Um, and it's free thanks to our generous sponsors, generous donors. And yeah, follow us on Instagram. We appreciate the interest. We appreciate the engagement. Tell your friends about it. The more people that know about it, the more interest, the more support we get, the more likely we are to be able to continue this for additional years into the future and involve more people in it. And the more people we get involved, the more we all are able to win and participate and collect more data.
That's great. Yeah, I appreciate your lifetime dedication to waterfowl and everything you do for Ducks Unlimited and for us hunters too. So thanks for that and have a great season this year.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks to you as well.